Thanks for tuning in at Brackeys.
Hello everyone and welcome to video number 20 in the How to Make a 2D Platformer course. In today's video we're going to be touching on a lot of different subjects, but overall we are going to finally make our enemy damage our player, and when he hits him we're also going to make the enemy explode. So that means that we will need to also make the battle status indicator actually work with our player to display his current health and his max health. And yeah, so we'll set that up. Cool, but before we get started, I quickly want to mention that I've just uploaded a huge update to UPA Toolkit. If you don't know what it is, it's a pixel art editor I've made so you can create pixel art inside of the Unity engine. And a new version has just been introduced, which comes with blend modes, a bunch of layer controls. You can see here you can now log layers, there's an opacity slider, you can duplicate and merge layers and all that kind of cool stuff. So if you want to quickly make some sprites for your game, I suggest you download that. Cool. So without further ado, let's head into Unity. And you can see that the scene is exactly as we left it off the last time. And the first thing we'll be doing here is jumping into the player script. So let's go ahead and go under scripts. Let's find the player script here. And this script, of course, sits on the player himself. And let's just zoom in a bit on this. And I basically just want to expand a bit on this player stats class. So the first thing we're going to be doing here is much like when we introduce the status indicator to our enemy, we'll be changing this idea of a health to instead include a max health and a current health. So we'll say that max health equals 100, and then we'll make a private integer. And if this is new to you, you can just go back and watch the latest video or the last video. And then we'll have a private int storing our current health. And we'll also have an accessor for that, a getter and a setter, which is a public int current health without the underscore. And that's not going to have a default value. Instead, we're going to, if I can format this correctly, give it a getter, and whenever we get this value, we simply want to return the current health private variable, and a setter. Whenever we set this, we simply want to say that current health should equal math.clamp, and the value that we want to clamp is the value that is passed, or that is passed in, that it's set equal to. And then the minimum, which is 0, and the maximum, which is going to be our maximum health. So this will just ensure that whenever we set our health equal to something, that it doesn't go below 0 or above our maximum health amount. Cool. And then we want to quickly make a public method called init, and that will simply set our current health equal to our max health. It's that simple, and you can either set the private variable here or the non-private, the accessor. I suggest using the accessor so that if we've messed something up with the max health, it will let us know. Cool, and you can see if we just open up our enemy script here that this is pretty much an exact duplicate so far of the enemy stats class. So now that that's done, I simply want to rename this player stats to stats because it sits under the player object, and I think that the naming is clear enough already. And whoops, that's from when I was testing some stuff out, simply ignore that. And then down here in our damage player, we want to change player stats.health to stats.current health. And we want to do the same here, stats.current health. And yeah, now that should actually be working. Next up, we want to integrate our status indicator. So remember, we created this status indicator script that basically allows us to set the health on some GUI objects, and it's pretty easy to expand upon. So basically what we'll do here is we'll create, this could be a public because we want to change it inside of the Unity editor, but actually I want to keep this private and then just make it accessible by marking it as a serialized field. So this needs to be a private status indicator, and we'll just call it status indicator with a small s. And inside of our start function, we'll make a start method here. We'll just check if status indicator, status indicator is equal to null. And if it is, we'll just throw an error here. On our enemy, we did the exact same thing, except we made the status indicator optional. And I think we'll force it to be on the player. So if it's not, we'll just print out an error message that says no status indicator referenced on player. Cool. And inside of the start method, we want to do one more thing, and that is init our stats. So we'll just call the init method there. Cool. Then inside of our damage player, we have to do one more thing. If it's not equal to null, then we want to set our GUI. So we'll call the set status indicator.set health, and that takes in our current health amount. So that's stats.current health, and our maximum health. So that's stats.max health. Awesome. And we simply want to copy this and do the same every time we have damaged the player. Cool. So that should actually integrate any status indicator into our player object. And now all we have to do is go under our player here and actually make the GUI for that. And for now, I think we should simply copy the status indicator from our enemy into our player object and reset the transform. Whoops. Wow, that made it huge. I simply wanted to reset the position. There we go. And then move it up a bit on the Y. Something like that. So it just floats above the player. Something like 0.7. Cool. And now we can simply select the player and drag in our status indicator. And that should update everything. So now when we play the game, we should see our status indicator updating to our current health and our max health. And we can test this by going under our player stats and changing our max health to something like 120 and just see if that updates. And indeed, it says 120. If you don't believe me, I'll just full screen this. Maximize on play. There you go. It says 120 there. But currently our enemy isn't damaging us, and we simply are able to kill him. So let's make that a bit harder. Also, I want to go into the enemy here and simply disable that debug.log under the weapon. I mean, I find that kind of annoying. Cool. So how do we change this? Well, basically we have this central enemy component. And all I want to do here is now we are going to make our enemy damage our player on impact. So let's double click on the enemy and let's go under the, and let's just check out the script. And basically I want to create a method, void, called onCollision enter to D. And I know that we've used the onTrigger enter before. I don't know if we've used the onCollision enter. Basically, Unity will make sure that if you spell this exactly as I've done it, that every time we collide with another object, this method will be called. So basically, we can collect information about what we've collided with by saying that it should pass in a parameter called collision to D. And we can simply name this collider info or call info. And what we can then do is we can grab the player component of that collider info. And then we can check if the player component is equal to null. If there simply isn't a player component, well then we probably haven't hit a player and therefore we don't need to do anything. But if there is a player component, then we can call the damage player method. So first let's just call this player component underscore player and set it equal to colliderinfo.collider.getComponent of type player. Then we check if there is a player component. So if underscore player is not equal to null, then we can say player dot, and then we can say damage player, and we can input a damage amount. So, but in order to input an amount, we need to have a variable, and let's add that into our enemy stats. So let's just make a public integer called damage, and we don't really need a get set for that. We will, however, give it a default amount of, let's say, 40. Cool. So now down here, all we need to do is simply say stats.damage, and it'll pass in the damage that this enemy does. Awesome. And that's basically, as far as I can see, that's all we need to do so far in order to damage our player. So if we hit the maximize on play and start playing here, we should see that the moment our enemy collides with us, our health should go down. And indeed it did. So let's try that again. There you see. Cool. But currently nothing happens to our enemy. It will just stay there and maybe move a little bit and maybe hit the player a few more times. But the effect isn't really that epic. So what we need to do here is we need to simply kill off our enemy the second that it has killed our player. So if it is our player we've hit, we damage the player, and we then simply damage the enemy by like a very big number. Just type in a bunch of 9s here. We could also just call the kill enemy if that's what you wanted to do on the game master object, but I like doing it through the damage enemy method, because then we can add sounds or whatever custom logic in here without having to do it separately. Cool, so we simply damage our enemy. So now whenever he hits our player, he will self-destruct. Cool. So that's basically the foundation of what I wanted to do today. But I also really would like if our player or if our enemy exploded by spawning a particle system, and also if our camera, if we applied a camera shake every time that happened. So in order to do this, all we need to do is go into our scripts and find our game master object, because this is responsible for killing off both the player and the enemy. So this is kind of the place we need to be in order to add this functionality. And you can see that currently we are simply using this public static void called kill enemy, which just destroys our enemy object. But I would like a local method, a non-static method, that sits on the GM object, so that we can use some variables, such as using some particles, a reference to those, and also a reference to our camera shake. So in order to do this, we basically need to call a local method, an instance method, through this static method. So first off, let's add some variables. The first one is going to be a public, and that when we are going to add a transform, and we're going to call this enemy death particles. We also need a public camera shake. Remember, we created that in an earlier video, and we'll simply call this camera shake. And I think I'll bring this up because we might use this in several contexts, so I'll just bring it up here because it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with our enemy dying. And basically all we need to do here is create that local method, and I think I'll just create it under the static one. And it's just going to be a public void. And I'll do underscore kill enemy to really signify that this is local and not static. And then we simply want to pass in the enemy as a parameter. And I've introduced this naming convention of using an underscore whenever you're passing in an argument. And so we can move this destroy enemy game object down here. And then here we simply want to say gm dot kill enemy. Oops. gm dot underscore kill enemy. There we go. And if we want to stick with the same naming convention here, let's do an underscore on the respawn player 2. There we go. And of course, when we are calling this, we need to pass in the enemy. And down here, we need this to be underscore enemy. So now we've set up the system where we have this static method that we can easily call. And that calls the local method that will be able to access these instance parameters. Awesome. So basically now what we can do is we can instantiate our enemy death particles at the position of our enemy. So enemy dot underscore enemy dot transform dot position, and just with 0 rotation. So we'll just do quaternion dot identity. Awesome. And also we can apply some camera shake. So we'll just do camera shake dot shake, and we want to shake a certain amount depending on the enemy. I think it could be cool if like big enemies died in this huge explosion and smaller enemies died in another one. Actually, we should make separate death particles depending on the enemy. That would be way cooler. So let's just remove that and just keep the camera shake here. And then let's go into the enemy here and let's give him a death particle. You could do this under enemy stats, or you could just do it here. I think I'll just do it here instead of going through the stats. But we simply need to add a public transform called death particles, like this, and do the same and inside the enemy stats we need to add a public float with the shake amount. I will default that to 0.1 and a public float with the shake length. We'll also default that to 0.1. Put in an F there. And that should be all we need. Then inside the start method, we'll simply check if our death particles is equal to null. Then debug.log error, no death particles referenced on enemy. Cool. So now inside of our game master, all we need to do is call camerashake.shake, and we'll input the underscore enemy dot stats. Actually, I don't want this inside of the stats. I think this should be inside of the just enemy class. So let's go back here, enemy dot shake amount, and the enemy dot shake length. And here, instead of the enemy death particles, we'll simply make that specific by calling it through the enemy. So we'll just get the death particles there. So now we can have separate shake amounts, shake lengths, and death particles for every enemy that we create. Now the only thing I want to do here lastly is just a check where we say void start. And I just want to check if camera shake is equal to null. Then we want to complain that no camera shake referenced in Game Master. Cool. That should be all the code that we need to do. For now at least, let's look at the alien spaceship and see that we now have a spot for the death particles, a shake amount, and a shake length. So now I want to go ahead and create a particle system that we can spawn whenever we die. So in order to do this, let's right click in the hierarchy. Let's go under and let's just select particle system. Let's focus in on this on the scene. Let's reset the transform and let's move it up a bit so we have some space where we can play around with it. Let's set the duration to 2 and the start lifetime to 2. Let's go under emission and change the rate to 0. Let's go under shape, change the type or the shape to sphere. And let's change the radius to something like 0.2. And we want to emit in a random direction. Let's now add a burst here of about 30 particles. And you can see that currently they just go out in this very huge sphere-like formation. So let's change the start speed to be random between two constants. That's going to be between 10 and 20. And you can see that's kind of a lot right now. But what we also want to do is we want to limit the velocity over lifetime. We want to dampen it by 0.1. And we want to set the speed to be equal to a curve that starts at 1 and then, and then goes down to like about 0.5. And you can see that this gives a pretty cool explosion look where everything just very quickly slows down. You can of course adjust how much you want it to slow down. This might be better actually. Cool. So now that we have that in place, we could, actually I want to damp this a lot more. Let's do 0.2. That looks pretty nice. And this is all about just adjusting the values to what you want to see. This looks fine for now. We can then add a gravity modifier. So if we give this a gravity scale of 1, I think that's a bit too much. Let's try something like 0.3. Still a bit too much for my taste. I think 0.15 might be good. Yeah, that looks pretty awesome. Cool. Then next up, we can go ahead and create a cool looking material for this. So let's right click in the project, go into material and rename this to additive. And we'll change the shader from standard to particles additive. And as the texture, we'll select the default particle for now. You can of course use any kind of texture and be nerdy about this. There are also a lot of cool looking free particles on the internet, or a lot of good assets at the Unity asset store if you wanted to really get serious with your particle systems. But then we want to drag this into the renderer material to actually apply that. And you can see that already makes it look a lot cooler. Then we can go under the size over lifetime and just make this shrink down. Not too much, just shrink a little bit. That looks pretty good. Let's also randomize the start size, so make that random between two constants. And I want that to be between maybe 1.5 and 1. Which looks pretty good. And next up, I want to go under the color over lifetime and make sure that they very quickly fade in and slowly fade out. That looks much better. Also, we can maybe change the start color here to a very yellowish color. Very bright. And then the end color, to something more red. So it will like fade like sparks. That looks actually pretty nice. We might limit the velocity even more. Let's try 0.3. 0.2. I don't know. You can play around with this as much as you want. I mean, it's really just about messing around with the values until you get something that looks right. You can play around with how many you want to actually emit. But I think we are just going to use this for now, and we'll call these alien spaceship death particles. And we'll drag them under the prefabs folder. There we go. Delete them from our scene, and also make sure to select the prefab and uncheck looping. And then we can simply select our alien spaceship and drag in the particles there. And also I just remembered that if we go under our GM object, we want to tell it to actually kill this off after a certain amount of time. So let's just quickly do that. Let's store this firstly in as a game object. And we'll just call this clone equals instantiate blah 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 as a game object. And then we simply want to call destroy clone after 5 seconds. See if that works. Cool. And now that we are actually ready to hit play. Whoops. No camera shake referenced in Game Master. It's very nice that we actually made it give us error messages like that because they are very important once your game gets bigger. So we'll simply find our camera shake here and drag it in. And let's try that again. And you can see our enemy explodes and our camera shakes. And this will also work if we kill him by shooting him. So that looks very nice. So now we finally have a game where our opponents can damage us and where we can kill off our opponents and it doesn't look horrible. So let's hit apply on the GM object, apply on the spaceship, and apply on the player. And just for fun, let's drag around some spaceships. Duplicate these and see them in action.
Respawning 3, 2, 1.
Cool, so that was the ending of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.